Thank you, Professor Ramon, for this very enlightening discussion. Yeah, so just to recapitulate, yeah, so Professor Ramon mentioned how the Philippine president has been frolicking with the Chinese government in the Southeast China Sea and engaging in mutual exploration that are not mutual at all, but rather one-sided. Yep. So with that, I would like to proceed to our next speaker, yeah, Didi Kirsten Tatlow, who is currently a senior fellow at the Asia program of the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. Her work focuses on China, particularly its relations with Europe and technology transfer, as well as on China's relations with Hong Kong and Taiwan. Tatlow is also a senior non-resident fellow at Project Synopsis in Prague, Czech Republic. She has worked as a journalist in Asia and Europe for 23 years, most recently as correspondent and columnist for the New York Times in Beijing from 2010 to 2017. Her articles focused on China, politics, society, gender, women's and children's rights issues, and Chinese-European relations. She is an editor and co-author of China's Quest for Foreign Technology Beyond Espionage. Born and raised in Hong Kong, Tatlow holds a bachelor's degree in Chinese and politics from the School of Oriental Studies, University of London. So with that, I would like to invite Didi Kirsten Tatlow to our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Naguib, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. I think it's such a big topic. BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, debt trap diplomacy is maybe one symbol of the BRI, an important one. There's simply so much to talk about that I'm a little bit sitting here trying to organize my thoughts as I listen to the very interesting speakers that have talked about Myanmar and Philippines. Well, I'm sitting in Berlin, and one thing I thought I'd kick off with was to talk about this comprehensive agreement on investment between Europe and between the EU and China. It's not directly BRI, if you like, but this deal, excuse me, this deal was signed on December 30th between Xi Jinping and Angela Merkel, Ursula von der Leyen, etc., Macron, and you know, it will essentially, I think, pivot, or has the ability to essentially pivot continental Europe towards China in a kind of a Eurasian trading landmass. And if it goes through, and if this difference with the United States that is presented by the CAI deal, some call it CAI, becomes what it could become, if you like, then I think we are actually possibly looking at a real geopolitical shift. It could be long term. We're talking about, you know, land routes versus sea routes. We're talking really grand strategy stuff, as Zarni already used the term grand strategy. Of course, there's a possibility that it will also spur the United States to reach out to Europe and to say, look, what's, you know, what can we do better together, to perhaps it'll show the United States it's got a lot to lose if it doesn't get its act together. And I think some of these new Biden appointees are looking quite interesting and, in my opinion, quite positive. So you know, so we'll see what happens there, but it's something to keep an eye on. Another reason I mention this CAI deal between the EU and Beijing and China is because Xi Jinping himself said shortly after it was signed, immediately after it was signed, there was very quick off the mark, that he wanted the BRI and this small Eurasian connectivity plan that the EU has had for a while, that no one's really paid much attention to join up. So there you have a kind of a political or almost, you know, ideological, if you like, well, a political attempt to fuse concepts in China and a concept in Europe in a way that, you know, is aimed at creating a kind of a harmonious whole. That's a very, you know, we'll be familiar with that idea coming from the Communist Party, and how that idea is used to build up communality and set aside differences, as they say. In reality, these differences tend to get steamrolled or even forcibly removed from the debate, as we've seen in Xinjiang, where, of course, the kind of attack, if you like, on Muslim people, on Chinese, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and others, has been very, very dramatic and painful, I think, for a lot of people, and really, frankly, awful. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Yeah, so also on the issue of the name, this Silk Road, unfortunately, I think it was a German who came up with that. So I sort of apologize on behalf of Germany. The Chinese originally just called it Beilu, the northern road, and then the southern road, the maritime Silk Road, so to speak, was the Nanlu, the southern road. So it's like northern road, southern road, land, sea, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Silk Road's obviously a romanticization as well, being a reference to trade. We're not just dealing with a so-called Silk Road or a land route and a sea route. We're dealing, of course, with multiple land routes. I think it's 6 economic corridors on land, with China at the center of this hub. 2 are highly relevant for Southeast Asia. The so-called China-Indochina Peninsula Economic Corridor that goes down through Vietnam. And the other one would be the Bangladesh-China-Myanmar-Indian Economic Corridor down through Myanmar. The other 4 are sort of, you know, Africa related and other things like that. 2 sea routes are relevant for Southeast Asia, of 3 in total. So it's at 6 land routes, 3 sea routes. They would be the China, India, Africa, Mediterranean route. So again, sort of India, Myanmar would be, you know, kind of, they need to go through, they need to go south. That would be the classic southern route that people think about that ends up in Africa. And then China, Oceania, and South Pacific, going the other way, past the Philippines, I guess. There's a third route, which is not so relevant for Southeast Asia. That's China and the Arctic, relevant for Europe. You know, in a sense, there's no question, but this is a highly organized plan. It was written into the Communist Party constitution in 2017. It was written into the Chinese state, the PRC constitution in 2018. It's the strategic focus is worked out by the National Development Reform Commission, NDRC, in Beijing. And there's no question but that it aims to create a Sinocentric world order to challenge and overcome the US-led world order. And I think that at this point, I just checked the statistics yesterday. There's a BRI website. It's called 一带一路, which means one belt, one road. And it's, as of December 2020, China claims it has done projects in 138 countries. And it also claims to be involving 31 international organizations in this work. That's important to China. They want that credibility, legitimacy of these international organizations. However, I think that the investment angle of BRI, as it's now called, it used to be called OBOR, One Belt, One Road. It's now called Belt and Road Initiative. I think that Beijing prefers the word initiative. It sort of sounds kind of more trendy, more management-y and all this kind of stuff, you know, more proactive and positive. That the infrastructure aspect, which is the debt trap diplomacy that I believe that we're talking about here, is only one part of this entire project, which is a power projection project by China. Yes, to export its overcapacity, absolutely. To export its labor, absolutely. But it is it's a question of power projection, geopolitical power projection, particularly west into down south, west into Europe, and notably, please note, doesn't touch the United States. It's very crucial. You look at the map, There's all these lines going around the world, but not to the Americas. Again, I think this shows very clearly what China is actually, trying to build and shape in the world here. Everything but the US. Yes, the US is the ultimate challenge and enemy for the Communist Party, as Mao himself said in 1956. And we're seeing a real process of, I think, of encroachment onto American power through these mechanisms, through Europe now. Kai is going to help that. America is the ultimate target and enemy for the Communist Party. That's just a historical tradition. It's an ideological tradition. It's doctrinal. We're not moving away from that at all. In fact, we're seeing a deepening right now. So in terms of the infrastructure issue, the debt trap diplomacy issue, I think it's definitely real. We just really no need to look at Africa, which is perhaps the most vulnerable in some ways, to see how that's working out. There are several African countries that have high debt to China. Angola owes 25 billion US, Ethiopia 13.5 billion, Zambia 7.4, Congo 7.3, Sudan 6.4. Notable here, Ethiopia 13.5 billion. Ethiopia is home to the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. There have been scandals about it being bugged by Beijing. I assume these are true. There's no reason why they wouldn't. I mean, this is great power behavior. And there's a fair amount of evidence out there. Also recently, I noted with great interest, China is creating the Africa CDC. So the Africa Center for Disease Control. Guess where? In Ethiopia. It's building it. This announcement came in the middle of this COVID pandemic. And I think it's probably not a coincidence that China is focusing on Ethiopia. We look at Ethiopia's geopolitical location. It's more accessible to China than, for example, Nigeria, Ghana, or anything over in the West, certainly than the South as well. It's not far from Djibouti, where China has a military base. First overseas military base, I do believe. So we're looking at a kind of a growth of a sort of a node of control and impact there. To get back to the debt trap issue, I think that, the investment, the infrastructure investment, which creates the most debt, is one of 5 connectivities in this entire initiative, the BRI initiative, which began in 2013, announced by Xi Jinping in 2013. Tiny diversion, if I may. Interestingly, it was announced in Kazakhstan for the road part, and in Indonesia for the belt part, the belt being maritime. So you had a northern announcement, you had a southern announcement, and there we're back to China's very old concept of the northern route, the Beilu, and the southern route, the Nanlu, which has now been made flowery in this sort of Orientalist term of Silk Road. The other aspects of this connectivity, apart from infrastructure, which creates the debt, is policy coordination. These are formal aspects defined by China. Policy coordination, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and people-to-people exchanges. Now you can see actually that many of these are in fact not, I suppose trade could be considered also more concrete, but in fact 3 of the 5 are really rather abstract. And this is an interesting point to me. We're looking, I think, with this BRI at really obviously a world view and a lot of ancillary and interconnected intangible activity, which is ideological or political, social in nature, aimed at massaging the way people think, at changing minds, at bending their mind away from one place towards another place. This classic CCP activity, you support, you control through support, you offer, it's also, there's a long Chinese tradition of this as well, known as jimi, which means to essentially control a herd of animals by feeding them and tying them up at the same time. So it's always the support, the positive aspect on one, and then the control, the negative aspect on the other. It's a sophisticated idea, and I think you see it happening in other places too, in different ways. But I want to look maybe a little bit more, given time constraints as well, at the kind of intangible aspects. And here I would point of the BRI. And here I'd point as well, first of all, to just show that we're not just talking about trade routes. We're talking about, of course, a so-called digital Silk Road. Very interesting. We're talking at a health Silk Road, gained new prominence during COVID. If only we knew what COVID really was and where it really came from. I think we're still waiting on quite a bit of information there. As far as I know, that even the WHO team is still blocked from entering China. We're talking about a think tank Silk Road. That's very interesting because when we think about it, there you're talking about a kind of elite, and I think that it's a well-known fact that elite capture precedes state capture. That would be what I would say about that one. And not just about that one, it's obviously a political and business thing too, but think tanks are important for shaping how people feel, think. You understand, Communist Party is, you know, they very much value the idea. It's real, it's really important. The ideology and idea of communism still shapes. And it's not just, oh, think tanks, let's just talk some stuff. No, it's absolutely central. So there we've got, even, believe it or not, in addition to digital, health, think tank, economic, business, what infrastructure, what you want, we've also got an outer space Silk Road. There is an outer space Silk Road. Okay, I just park that idea for a bit. I think, you know, when you look at the scale of all of this, I don't see that there's really any space for arguing that this is some sort of just, you know, coincidental or innocent desire to, you know, improve the world, to just develop for development's sake. There's simply too much infrastructure, too much thinking, too many political things going on here. And, you know, ultimately, I think that what China wants to do with this venture is, first of all, to change the outside world sufficiently so that it protects the Communist Party at home in order to ensure the survival and continued rule of the Communist Party at home. So it has to remove outside threats. Second of all, it wants to actually, I do believe, export its, I think it does truly believe it can build a better form of so-called democracy, that its political system is genuinely superior. Now, I think anybody looking at the situation in Xinjiang or Hong Kong, where I am myself from, the fact that we've had nearly 400 air incursions, military incursions by the PLA Air Force into Taiwan airspace in 2020. We're dealing with COVID, which came from Wuhan in whatever shape or form. You know, I mean, how are we going to get together and sort of just manage these challenges? I think that's a question I'd leave. And then before I stop, I'll stop in a second. But to get back to the actual debt trap issue, I mentioned the individual debts in Africa, for example, but the fact is that there's a lot of talk about how to relieve these debts. They're crippling African countries. Again, China is the single largest bilateral creditor in Africa, and it is so far the least willing to cancel the debt. There are talks going on. The United States actually is saying, let's cancel it. You know, this is not helping the African countries. We can move on. The French are a bit unwilling. China is saying, no, these debts were incurred to commercial banks. They're identifying banks, including the China Import-Export Bank, as commercial banks, which is nonsense, of course, because, or the China Development Bank is nonsense because these are policy banks. They take orders from the government, from the party. So, but they're arguing, they're trying to argue that these are commercial debts. No, you owe it. So those talks are going on. There's a fair amount of annoyance about the fact that China is obstructing debt relief. And so that's an area where I would encourage people to look, if they have the time, into this particular African question and how China's dealing with the debts that it has, that other African countries have incurred with China, and why it doesn't want to cancel them. So I'll stop there. Lots to talk about. Thanks very much.